So, Alex, we've been told for a long time the climate change emergency has settled science. It looks like it's no longer settled. What happened?
Well, there's a series of 3 new peer-reviewed papers published in major prestigious scientific journals just over the last month or so. And taken together, they completely undermine the alleged scientific consensus on man-made global warming. One of them found that about 40% of the observed warming can be explained away using the urban heat island effect. So to try to summarize that, basically a lot of these thermometers were put out there in an open field, in a rural area. A city was built up around it, and so it gets warmer, obviously, not because there's global warming, but because there's a city around the thermometer. The rest of the warming, they found, can be easily explained using changes in solar activity that NASA has been tracking meticulously for many decades. And so right now, these are in the peer-reviewed literature, and instead of responding to this, you've got the climate establishment going on Twitter and saying these guys are basically poo-poo heads and clowns and deniers. You know, at this point, you wonder, do they have a scientific response? Because if they did, they would probably write a peer-reviewed paper to refute the ones that just undermined their claims.
Well, how did they get them in? You know, it's hard to get a peer-reviewed paper when it comes to these topics. What was the kind of hole in the wall that brought this about, so to speak?
You're right. It is very hard to get any peer-reviewed studies in the journals because there's almost like an iron wall blocking this. And we got some insight into this during the ClimateGate scandal in 2009 when a bunch of emails were hacked and leaked to the public showing a bunch of so-called climate scientists, in fact, some of the leading so-called climate scientists, conspiring to hide their data from other researchers, conspiring to hide the decline in global temperatures, and conspiring to silence any scientists who wouldn't go along with the narrative, keep them out of the journals, keep them out of TV, media interviews, etc. And so what happened is these papers were just really solid. These 3 journals that published them, they're not known for being, climate denier publications, but the science was very sound. They did one special issue in the journal Climate, for example. They had some guest editors, including Dr. Ned Nikolov, who I wrote about back in 2017. They looked at this. They said, wow, this is correct as best as we can tell. So the peers looked at it, they accepted it, and this is a really prestigious team, Josh. We're talking about almost 40 scientists from around the world. The lead author, Dr. Willie Soon, one of the world's top astrophysicists, if not the top astrophysicist, he used to be at the Harvard Smithsonian. You've got Ronan Connolly. These are very, very well-established, very prestigious, highly credentialed experts, and it's good to finally see some alternative viewpoints published in the peer-reviewed literature. I think the dam is finally cracking, Josh.
Yeah, well, what I've heard from a lot of people before was that nobody dares say it. Everybody understands it, nobody dares say it. What effect are we seeing now that some pretty credible people are stepping forward on this?
That's exactly right. And I reached out to a lot of scientists for my article in the Epoch Times about this. And over again, I kept saying, I'd love to comment, but I can't because my funding's going to be jeopardized. My grant's going to be jeopardized. If I get associated with saying that these papers are important, I'm going to be, labeled and I won't be able to participate anymore in scientific debates. So there's still a very real sense that that's going on. But when you look at the scientists behind these papers, for example, Dr. Willie Soon, these are people who've now moved away from the major institutions. Dr. Willie Soon ended his time at Harvard Smithsonian last year, and they're now working independently. So they have an organization called CERES. That's the real issue, right? Any scientist who comes out and says, hey, the UN is not telling the truth, the federal government's not telling the truth, their grants are going to dry up. If they're not tenured, they're going to be at risk of losing their job. But when you take a bunch of scientists who are completely independent, who don't need federal grants, who don't need to participate with the UN, they have a lot more freedom, and I think that's what's going on here.